So today is October 29th, 2025. And I just mentioned that I was given this topic of offering a formal talk on joy yesterday. And so normally when I gave talks at my previous community, I normally had a couple weeks worth to write a talk and to come up with one and to sit with one. And so I did this in less than 24 hours. So we're going to see how this goes. So last night, my brainstorming began over dinner with my sister and my nephew, Banner, who's now 10, and Summit, who's now 7. And the question I offered them was, what brings you joy? And, there was a qualifier to this, and it was, joy is something that always, without question, brings a smile to your face. It isn't happiness. Happiness is temporary. So I had to give them an example of they're really into Pokemon. So when you open a pack of Pokemon cards, you're excited and then it's over and you go to the next one. That's happiness. Whereas joy is something that's a little more enduring. And we'll get to that in a moment. So here are some of the things that Summit, age 7, said that brought him joy. Macaroni and cheese, The Hobbit, specifically the characters of Thorin and Azog the Defiler. So found that to be interesting and funny. His brothers Banner and Wicker bring him joy, and also riding the tractor with Uncle Matt. So when they came to my house this past summer, Uncle Matt would drive them around our property on our tractor. And so he loved that. Banner, age 10, also said his brothers, Summit and Wicker. He also said sleeping in, birthdays, fuzzy blankets, playing foursquare at school with his friends, and Aunt Lani and her bandanas. So he's a little bit of a sycophant child, and I like that. And then my sister jumped in, and it was really sweet because it gave her and I an opportunity to really connect on this question of joy. And so she said, planning for Christmas, making Christmas cookies, and Black Friday shopping. And just to say, Christmas was such a big deal in our family growing up. We grew up pretty close to the poverty line. And, as my parents' jobs and education, as they went onward, it wasn't like that. But Christmas was such a big deal. And Mom and Dad always went full out. We never wanted over Christmas. And so it's such a special time for us. She also added that things that bring her joy are Diet Coke, watching college football on Saturdays, rainstorms, and taking her boys to Disneyland. And of course, Summit then said, okay, so you go next, Aunt Lani. So what came up for me were hugs from all of them, an uninterrupted afternoon to read a good book with a good cup of coffee, Diet Coke, vegetable seed catalogs, walking my dogs with my husband and pigs. I love pigs so much. So this conversation got me thinking about a time when I was volunteering with a student of mine. And this has to have been at least 2 decades ago. And I know this shows my age, but I was volunteering with my student, Catherine, at a place called Keys Towers in Ohio. And it's an apartment complex where it houses senior citizens who are below the poverty line. And so the residents who live there often have to make the choice between paying their rent and utilities, paying for food, and paying for prescriptions. And I did a little bit of research in Ohio today, and this is before November 1st, because things are going to change with the government shutdown. SNAP benefits. The average person receives $33.20 a week for food. Can you imagine living on $33.20 a week for food? That's all you had? So back to Keys Towers. My friend Carol was a social worker there. She was also a nurse there, and she worked there 3 days a week, checking blood pressure, making sure they get proper flu vaccinations, offering some counseling, and she kept this cabinet in her office that she used as a food pantry. And so she collected items from friends and family and her synagogue, as well as my own high school classroom. But similar to most canned food drives, what is given to the needy are the groceries that we don't want. It's our leftover canned corn, canned green beans, canned beans, canned soup. And so that day, Catherine and I were making peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for the residents who needed some extra food that day. And Carol was really great about making sure there are plenty of options for protein and fiber and those sorts of things that aren't always accessible in a canned food item. And in walks this woman. She had a walker, and it was covered in unicorn stickers. And she walks over to the pantry. She shuffles around, and then she turns around and smiles at me. And she holds this can of peaches over her head, and she's like, yes, I get to eat a can of peaches today. I am so excited. I cannot wait to tell my granddaughter I'm going to be happy for a month. And I'm like, what? Like, WTF? Like, I was stunned because a can of peaches? Seriously, like, canned peaches were this woman's joy. How simple. Canned peaches. How often do we take canned peaches for granted? How often do we go to our pantries and say, there's nothing to eat, when in reality we have so much? How often do we not want to eat the leftovers in our fridge and simply throw them away? And I've seen this one in a few spiritual communities. How often do we not want to eat something because it isn't organic? Or how often do we judge or shame people because of their food choices? So let me bring this back to joy again. Canned peaches were this woman's joy. They weren't organic. They aren't necessarily heavy because they were in heavy syrup. They came from a small food pantry. But these canned peaches were still joy. She couldn't wait to tell her granddaughter. So, what is joy? So in the book of Joy, by the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and if you haven't had a chance to read this book, I really encourage you to do so. They say that joy is enduring. It's not temporary. It's the breakdown of a variety of complex feelings like pleasure, relief, pride, gratitude, rejoicing in the happiness of others, wonder, or spiritual radiance. And I find it really interesting that they also bring up that joy can be schadenfreude, where we relish in the suffering or humiliation of others. And the first thing I thought of was, I'm sure some of you have been seeing how Gavin Newsom has been trolling somebody who's high up in the government. And if you haven't seen that, I would encourage you to Google it. But it has brought me so much joy to read those tweets. And so, but I also want to be clear, this is schadenfreude. Archbishop Desmond Tutu also shares that joy can be challenging. And he says, and I quote, "Discovering joy, I'm sorry to say, does not save us from the inevitability of hardship and heartbreak. In fact, we may cry more easily, we may laugh more easily too. Perhaps we're just more alive. Yet as we discover joy, we can face suffering in a way that ennobles us rather than embitters us. We can face hardship without becoming hard, and we can experience heartbreak without being broken." The Dalai Lama adds, "The ultimate source of joy is within us. And sadly, that many of the things that undermine our joy, we create ourselves. The good news is we have the ability to create our own joy and joy for others, because it is a skill to be practiced. And every time I read this book or I sit with this idea, I have to constantly remind myself that joy is a skill. It has to be cultivated. So let's try this out. So in your mind's eye, I want you to picture 3 things that bring you joy. Not happiness, but joy. Don't overcomplicate it. Just allow joy to emerge. And give me a nod when you have those 3 things. Okay. My guess is joy can be quite simple, like a can of peaches, but it will take some practice. So let's look at some science now, because our brains are hardwired for joy. The Institute of Neuroscience and Psychology at the University of Glasgow suggests that we only have 4 fundamental emotions, and those are fear, anger, sadness, and joy. And Richie Davidson, who is a really famous neuroscientist, he also wrote the book Altered Traits for those of you in the SAGE program. He suggests that we only have, he suggests that within joy there are 4 independent brain circuits that influence lasting well-being. So circuit number 1, he says, is our ability to maintain positive states. And we can activate this joy circuit by contemplating joy, love, and compassion. So we just practice this first one. Think of 3 things that bring you joy, that are enduring. Circuit 2 is our ability to learn to recover from negative states. Circuit 3 is our ability to stop our mind from wandering and creating stories that are not centered in reality. And this is meditation. And this is the 5 conditions, or the 5 skandhas. And the 4th circuit that Richie Davidson has found this is our ability to be generous. So our brains feel good when we're generous with one another. And even when we witness other people being generous, our circuits are still activated. So with the holiday season that's coming up, at least in the Ohio area, they have the Salvation Army people who have the red buckets and they're ringing their bell, and you can donate money at the grocery store during the holiday season. So when you see somebody else donate money, your joy circuits activate. And similarly, when you sit zazen with others, your joy circuits activate. Joy can be collective. Another way that we can work on this skill of joy, specifically on a brain-based level, is developing empathy for people who are not part of our in-groups. So this is like old school, middle school sort of thing. Like, we have to expand our empathy to not just the people in our groups, but to those who we feel neutral towards or that we have aversion towards. Dalai Lama offers us a warning. He says, if we only cultivate empathy for the people who we like, we only perpetuate the idea of the separate self. The Dalai Lama calls this biased love and biased compassion. So, for example, if you only physically interact with people who you like or who are like you, you are working from a place of biased love and biased compassion. If you only feel empathy for people who are like you or people who believe like you, you are working from a place of biased love and biased compassion. And this is a significant obstacle to deeper practice. It's a tall order. If you want to go deeper into your practice, you need to get out of your comfort zone, physically, spiritually. So, for example, if you begin to practice empathy for the homeless because you have an aversion towards the homeless, your joy circuits will activate. But even better, if you offer empathy for the homeless by keeping extra bottles of water in your car and handing them out when you see a homeless person, you are activating your joy circuit in a significantly stronger way than just sending positive energy. And to give a neutral example, if you begin to practice empathy for your mail carrier every week because you are neutral towards them, your joy circuits begin to activate. But even better, if you offer gratitude to the mail carrier by placing a thank you note in your mailbox for them, your joy circuit activates in a significantly stronger way than just sending positive energy. It's one thing to contemplate joy, to sit with joy. It's another to have action behind it. So when we see the news and there's all this, thoughts and prayers, I'm sending you thoughts and prayers, which can seem really trite. There is some reality to that. But real joy, compassion, and empathy is through action. So the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, they also offer us some strategies as we begin to practice the skill of joy. And so the first one is start where you are. You need to realize that you are not meant to resolve all of these problems on your own. Do what you can. Don't beat yourself up if you cannot take on something huge. Start small. They suggest, do not deny pain and suffering. But when you begin to notice pain and suffering, shift your perspective from yourself to others. Shift your anguish to compassion. But try to avoid repression here. See that others are suffering too. You're not alone. We all suffer. We all are worthy of compassion. Another way that we can practice with joy is by beginning to lessen our usage of personal pronouns like I, me, or my. And what's really interesting is that Columbia University shares that when people disproportionately use these pronouns, they have a significantly higher chance of having a heart attack. Using these pronouns are better predictors of death than smoking, high cholesterol, or high blood pressure. They are also more likely to struggle with depression. A really fun way they suggest in keeping joy in the forefront of our experiences is keeping a list of things that we're grateful for within arm's reach. So like the wallpaper on your smartphone. So whenever you click your smartphone on, you see the items that you're grateful for. Or putting a list on your bathroom mirror. And, the scientific study also from Columbia University shows, people who kept this list in easy to access places became more optimistic and exercised more often. Another one is forced smiling. And just hear me out on this one. So if you force yourself to smile for 20 seconds, it'll trigger positive emotions because it's so ridiculous. And it works. The Dalai Lama also, he sets a daily intention. And he says it's this real lovely way to begin his day after Zazen. He says, I remember that everything is interrelated. Let this day be meaningful. Let me serve others today. Let me do minimal harm today. A meta-analytic study from Mount Sinai at St. Luke's Medical Hospital found that those who volunteer their time on a regular basis, especially some of our older friends, you will have as likely the chance to develop Alzheimer's because there's interaction there. Also, if you're doing a volunteer effort that is outside of your comfort zone or out of the regular places where you may volunteer, depressive symptoms will decrease. They also suggest for us to all be open to the humanity of those we see as object or other, to those that we feel neutral towards, or those who we feel aversion towards. The Dalai Lama shares a story in the Book of Joy. He says, "When I first met President George W. Bush, we immediately became friends on a human level. Not on an official level, but on a human level. So they were sitting together and a tray of cookies was brought to them. And the Dalai Lama looked over at George W. Bush and said, 'Which one is the best?' And George W. Bush pointed to a cookie, and they both ate a cookie together, and they've been friends ever since." I mean, like, this is kindergarten 101, sharing a cookie. It brings joy. It brings people of two very different backgrounds together. There's a connection there. And the last one I want to highlight is Desmond Tutu says, "Permit vulnerability in your life. Welcome it." He says, and I quote, "We don't get close to one another if our relationships are made up of unending hunky-doriness. It's still the hard times, the painful times, the sadness and the grief that knits us more closely together." So just like our practice on the mat or our practice in devotion or in prayer, it's just that. It's practice. And some days will be harder than others. And that's okay. It's a work in progress. Especially in these times right now, it's definitely a work in progress. So we have to practice at it. So just to make a couple more direct connections to Zen Buddhism, there are a few koans that align with joy in practice. So remember that when working with a koan, it's not meant to be intellectualized or conceptualized. They are to be lived and experienced, just like joy. And maybe joy is your koan now. So, case 45 in the Blue Cliff record, a monk asks Master Joshu, "The myriad of phenomena return to the one. Where does this one return to?" And Master Joshu responded, "When I was in Seishu, I made a hempen cloak. It weighed 7 pounds. What is it about Master Joshu's answer? I made a hempen cloak. It weighed 7 pounds. That brings forth joy. Or, case number 6 in the Blue Cliff record. Ummon addressed his assembly of monks and said, "I am not asking you about the day before the 15th of the month, but what about after the 15th of the month? Come and give me a word about those days." And nobody would answer, so he answered himself. He said, "Every day is a good day." So what is it about Master Ummon's response? Every day is a good day. That brings forth joy. And here's a more modern one. Bernie Glassman, who Richard talked about a few weeks ago, he shared, "Let me give you a Zen practice. Wake up in the morning, look in the mirror, and laugh at yourself." So joy can come from many places. even from a simple can of peaches. And I can tell you, every single time I think about or I see a can of peaches, I remember that woman holding the can up, being like, I get to eat these peaches. And so I feel joy now too. And I hope that when you see a can of peaches now, you too will feel joy. So thank you so much. I'm going to stop the recording and we can chat and ask questions and all of those things. Thank you.